Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to a Look Back to Guide the Future in Hilliard webinar. My name is Paula Hyman from the Ohio LTAP office. Before we begin today, I want to cover just a few housekeeping items. If you have questions throughout this presentation, go ahead and locate the questions pod, type a hi, hello, almost Friday, whatever you like into that questions pod. That's where you're going to put your questions throughout today's presentation, and our presenters will address your questions periodically, either during the presentation or probably at the end. Everybody go ahead and locate that questions pod and type in there now just to make sure you know where it's located and how it works. Down in the handout section, you're going to notice that there are 3 handouts available. If for some reason you are unable to download those handouts, put your email address in the questions pod and I will email them to you. I want to thank you in advance for your participation today. And with that, I'm going to pass things off to Ms. Letty Shamp, Director of Transportation and Mobility with the City of Hilliard. Letty?
Thank you, Paula. Good afternoon, everyone. So last year at the Ohio Roundabout Conference, if any of you were actually in attendance in person, I talked a little bit about some recent changes that were made at a couple of our roundabouts in Hilliard and what was coming next. So my presentation here today is part a sequel, so to kind of report out on some of the findings and results of some of the changes that we made last year at a couple of our roundabouts, and also part prequel to kind of look back on our history of our roundabout program in Hilliard and how it's really kind of guiding our future. I'm really excited to be here today with Gina Balsamo, with Carpenter Marty. She's been helping us with kind of a little bit of that look back this year. And so I'm going to do the first part of the presentation, then I'm going to pass it off to Gina, and then I will kind of wrap up things at the end. So for those of you that may not be familiar, Hilliard, Ohio population is about 38,000 and our greater metropolitan area of about 2 million. Here in Hilliard, we have 14 roundabouts presently, hybrid multi-lane, and 2 2x2s. We actually have about 9 more currently that are in some stage of planning, design, or construction over our next 5-year planning period. So I want to take a second to kind of look back here in the United States. So if you think about it, the first modern roundabouts in the United States were built in the early 1990s. And so the first roundabout guide that was published in 2000 was based heavily on either international experience or very limited US experience. But those roundabout guides take a while the research takes a while to go into them to actually write them. So by the time they're published, there's probably new information out there. So in Ohio, our Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the 2005 edition, actually had very little information in it about roundabouts. So when I look back, we first started dipping our toes into roundabouts in terms of the design was about 2004. A lot of the guidance that we had that we were working off was probably already outdated. And then fast forward to 2010, when NCHRP Report 672 was published, which was the second edition of the Roundabout Guide. Again, that information that actually got put into that published document probably still had very limited experience and data for some of the more complex roundabouts that we're starting to see now. And again, the OMU-TCD, that was the 2012 edition, we're really lucky to have a lot more information in there, some great updates on roundabout design guidance. But I think it's really important that we never use these guides as prescriptive, you do these things a certain way, because what we're finding is roundabout guidance is constantly evolving. And we all really need to stay up on what's going on, what research is going on, and talking with each other. So these webinars are great opportunities to do that and always be making changes in how we do things to do a better job. So when I look back on the early years, when we talk about multi-lane roundabouts, these pictures are all different types of multi-lane roundabouts. But I think a mistake that we made is we kind of tended to lump all multi-laners into one category. But each one of these has very different operational characteristics as well as crash patterns. So for what we're doing here today, the lating on all four legs, so it actually is a full 2x2. The image on the right is not a 2x2 roundabout. It's what I would consider a 2x1 or a hybrid. And it's actually different on most of the legs. So the west leg is a 2x1, the south leg is a 1x2, and then the east and the north legs are 1x1 plus, as I call them. So it's basically a single lane roundabout entering and circulating with those right turn bypass lanes. So roundabout's a safer choice. I think most of us probably on this webinar here today probably very much believe in this. I absolutely think that when you look at trying to create a more forgiving infrastructure that is forgiving of people making mistakes on the road, roundabouts are the way to go. We know that they slow people down if they're designed properly. We know that the angle of impact is much more forgiving. So for us, it's a no-brainer. But when you think about what the public sees sometimes, they're not always differentiating between a single lane or a multi-lane. They tend to like to lump them into a good roundabout or a bad roundabout. And so when we talk about, early on, there were always these safety stats that, roundabouts reduce crashes by X%. But, I think a dirty little secret that a lot of us weren't really talking about maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago is this crash problem that we're having at some of these multi-lane roundabouts. This graph shows, so the intersection of Main Street and Cemetery Road in Hilliard is one of our busier intersections. It has about 3,200 vehicles per hour entry, and that was a 2019 count, so pretty accurate pre-COVID. It was a signalized intersection until the end of 2011, and then you can see immediately our crashes spiked and have gone up considerably over the years. Now, one nice little thing that we're seeing here in 2019, we are showing a promising trend, but that was after a pretty heavy investment that we did last year, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more. So we're not alone. I used to think I was alone in this problem that we were having in Hilliard, but we know that's not the case. This was actually a message board post that got routed around through the Roundabout listserv earlier this year. And what I thought was really cool is that Minnesota DOT, is a source from them. They actually did a study a while back that really looked at different intersection control types and the crash rates, comparing. And I like the way they separate out single lane roundabouts, unbalanced roundabouts, which I am assuming is something similar to a 2x1 or a hybrid that I'm talking about, and a full dual being a 2x2 or greater. And you can see that clearly the numbers are showing that the crashes are up in those, significantly up in those 2x2s. So when we start thinking about building roundabouts in our communities, especially when they may be new in an area, you've got to be really careful that you want to set yourself up for success and start small. So what we've learned is there are a lot of PDO crashes at some of these 2x2s. And typically it's the same two causes. A failure to yield, sort of, and I say sort of because we've got video of a couple crashes at our Main and Cemetery Roundabout, and actually in many cases drivers are actually stopped at the yield line and then they just drive into the side of a vehicle. So it's not like they're just blowing through the intersection. It's lack of understanding that someone in the inside lane can exit out. Same thing, some of these incorrect lane choice crashes. Lots of times it's someone making a incorrect left turn movement from the right lane or circulating around in the outside lane. And again, the commonality there is that cars are exiting out of the inside lane, and many drivers don't understand that that's the way these modern roundabouts work. So this crash problem is actually part of a big research project that's going on right now. Some of you may have listened in on the webinar that I think was Tuesday with Wei Zhang, Dr. Zhang from FHWA, and Justin Banson, who's part of the research team with Kittleson. Talked a little bit about the pooled fund study. I'm not going to get into that too much, but what we know is that not all 2x2 roundabouts are high crash, but most high crash roundabouts are 2x2s or bigger. So what they're trying to dig into is, are there commonalities in the high crash or non-high crash 2x2s, so that you know, kind of help all of us in the future be able to make good decisions on whether, boy, are we setting ourselves up for success here with a 2x, or are we setting ourselves up for potential failure, if you will. So this is a combined project. FHWA is lead. Virginia Tech is the main research team, and then there's a series of DOTs and City of Hilliard that are participating in that. So I'm going to recap here. So we, our Metropolitan Planning Organization, MORPC, used to put out a list every year of high crash intersections. And it's the top 100 in our entire region. And then they would also divvy out the top 5 for each community within our MPO. And these 3 roundabout intersections were in the top 100. And actually our number 1 location right there was the 2nd highest frequency in terms of crash rate in all of our regions, 2nd highest. But the great thing is it was the lowest severity. So there are some really good stories here, but having a really high crash rate is not where you want to be. So back in 2017, we actually conducted a pretty detailed study of these 3 roundabouts, came up with some recommendations and some suggestions or recommendations in terms of some infrastructure modifications, which we designed in 2018. And then in 2019, we kind of hit it hard. We really kicked off a pretty significant education and outreach campaign in our area. And then we constructed tier 1 of these infrastructure modifications at all 3 of these roundabouts last summer and last fall. And then 2020 is where we are today, and we've been spending some time evaluating, looking at both crashes and speeds at these roundabouts to see whether whether our investment was worth it or not. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about that evaluation of those infrastructure modification at our 3 high crash roundabouts. So again, looking at before and after crashes, as well as before and after speeds of our Main Street roundabouts, which are number 1 and number 2 right here. So Main Street and Cemetery Road, the chat pod, they actually, if you're interested, you can actually see detail by detail the things that we changed, the kind of before and an after picture. So we put in raised crosswalks at all 8 of our crossings here. We switched out our side-mounted lane control signs and with overhead lane control signs. We got rid of the fish hooks, put in traditional arrows. We changed some of the arrow placements in the circulatory roadway here. We kind of moved them more towards the end. Then we changed it to a single skip. So what we did here today is actually a coastline. Minnesota DOT may have done something similar to this. It's basically a ground out, almost like a grind line in here. And it's basically to kind of just re-emphasize that inside lane can exit out. We also changed our yield through August 31st of 2020. So it can decrease. First month had some increase there. Crosswalks, not sure. Even before COVID, we were seeing a pretty significant decrease in our crashes. We do think there's probably a COVID impact here. Our volumes are down, our crashes are down citywide, but actually if we kind of factored that in, and we still were showing a fairly significant reduction in our crashes. Now I'm going to go through speeds here. So these speeds were taken at the entry in advance and then the exit from the circulatory roadway. As well, 85th percentile speeds are the exit lane crosswalks. We did do the zigzag crosswalk a little too far out because out you are so recent or under at the crosswalks, because that seems to be, again, that sweet spot for motorists yielding. So that's what our goal was. So again, these were taken in May of 2017 when we were doing our study, so before the infrastructure improvements. These are those speeds at the same location in May of 2020, so about 9 months or so after we made the improvements. And the deltas, so the change, is shown here. So those of you that work in traffic percentile speeds when you have a lot of traffic going through and sustained over a 9-month period, we're pretty pleased of something that we did. That being said, if any of you have driven through these roundabouts, you know that the raised crosswalks definitely get your attention. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So now I'm going to move to the number 2 Darby Road. This is not a 2x2, it's a 2x1 with right turn, with the right lanes are right turn only. I'm having a lot of tree was really flat. You can kind of see right line. You can also see it up and just pretty much running into the side of them. So we made these geometric modifications using quick curb. We cut back the south splitter island, to try to be with it enough that it had a pretty significant, the true story. But if you look at those northbound crashes, northbound to eastbound coming in at that leg, they actually went down really significantly because some of these other crashes that we've had are at other locations along in that roundabout. Not expecting significant, that's really where we're seeing some. There's this one leg that has the left turn lane at 2x2. So what we did here is we did not do resurfacing. So we just did signs and pavement markings only, and we did not invest in the overhead lane control signs. We modified some of the circulatory markings, and we got rid of the fish hooks, like what we actually, that's not too bad for a Davidson roundabout. So here's our big picture here. So going back to when the roundabouts were opened, so in 2012, you can see a pretty significant reduction starting at both of, this is the number 1 roundabout, this is number 2. A decent reduction in 2019 because we made the changes in August, July and August. And then so far this year, not too bad. And actually this data is through last Friday. So yeah, so overall pretty pleased. So one thing, so we've spent years on the squeaky wheel and what's shouting at us in our Main Street. Are there things that are going well that we need to take note of? Or are there any problems that maybe are flying under the radar that we're really not? We do a lot of different task order type projects for us. Dive into all of our roundabouts to kind of look at crash frequency, crash overview, ICDs, lane configurations, and come up with some conclusions and recommendations to help us do better in the future. So I am going to pass over to Gina, and she's going to take it over from here.
Okay, and Letty, we actually have some questions that have come up, so I don't know if you want to cover some of those now.
Yeah, let's look here. All right, so I see one question. Is the ghost line like a pavement construction? It's actually, be able to see it. Yeah, so the idea of this like a construction line, it almost reminds me of a removal of a pavement marking line within a construction zone. And we all know that when the pavement's wet or when it's dark, that sometimes the regular pavement markings don't always show up, but we tend to use those grind lines as guidelines. And that's, do I have a blow up of the double strong skip? How is Hilliard's doing with its fatal and serious in the boy? So 50 of serious injuries. Crashes, it's there. Did I catch everything, Gina?
I think so.
I'll let you take it over.
Yeah, we'll go through a safety review of all the roundabouts in Hilliard. Now, this is a graphic that's kind of like what Letty was showing before, but instead it shows that each of the roundabouts were constructed. So like she said, there's 14 roundabouts total, and we were going to look at all of them, but we actually ended up just looking at 9 a line. We downloaded the crash data from ODOT-TIMS for each roundabout, and that included each intersection approach as well. And the data query for each started, and also note that we were just looking at the raw data at this point. We weren't going through each OH1 report. We weren't making crash diagrams. We were just trying to take a high level look at, you know, what. So I'm going to go through each roundabout, starting out with our oldest roundabout and then moving through to our youngest roundabout. And you can kind of see from the pictures too, it's interesting to see how the designs have changed over the multi-lane 2x1 with an inscribed circular diameter of 160 and 180, had an opening year of 2006, and the crash data query period was 2008, which was the furthest data we could get back to. Were 146 crashes total over those 11 years. So that's 13.3 crashes per year on average. And then looking at that data spread out a little bit, you can see we had a lot of crashes in 2008, and then, you know, kind of wavered through the years, but the last 3 years of data, really the highest 3 years of data that we have. The crash types were spread out through rear end, fixed object, sideswipe passing, and angle crashes. Crashes per hour, you know, you can see a bit of a peak down here during the morning rush hour, you know, a lot spread out throughout the afternoon, and then another peak here during the evening rush hour. And then, as is typical with a lot of these roundabouts, you know, we have a lot of property damage only crashes, and then some non-incapacitating injury or possible injury crashes. And moving on to our next one at Britton and Riggins, this was a multi-lane 2x2 with an ICD of 180, an opening year of 2006. And over the 11 years of data we had, there were 89 crashes total, with an not as bad as the last one, but still pretty notable. And this one you can increasing over the years. And crash types were spread out by sideswipe passing, fixed object, left turn, and angle crashes. Crashes per hour, again, you know, some peaks throughout an afternoon peak here, and then your evening rush hour. And again, a lot of property damage only crashes. Moving on to hybrid with an ICD of 160, an opening year of about 2000. So over 9 years of data, we only had 11 crashes. So this one's pretty good at 1.2 crashes per year on average. So this one, you know, it's a little harder to see some trends from about 1 to 2 crashes per year, rear end and angle as well. Crashes per hour, you know, kind of spread out. And again, a lot of property damage only crashes. So this roundabout, maybe not one that we're really worried about. Britton with an ICD of 180, an opening year of about 2000 data, there were 43 crashes total. That's 4.7 crashes per year on average. And looking like an increase in crashes throughout the years. A lot of fixed object crashes at this one, with some angle, rear end, and sideswipe passing. A definite peak here between 4 and 5 p.m. And then again, a lot of property damage only crashes. At Britton and All Seasons, this was a multi-lane 2x1 hybrid with an ICD of 160 and 180. An opening year of 2013, 13 total crashes over 5 years of data. So that's 2.6 crashes per year on average. This one was a little different. It seemed like we had more crashes the opening year, and then it kind of leveled out at 2 crashes per year after that. And the crash types were pretty spread out as well, with some sideswipe passing, rear end, fixed object, and angle crashes. And the crashes were pretty spread out throughout the day as well. And again, a lot of property damage. Okay, now we're getting into more of our newer roundabouts. So this one at Audubon and Woodland with an ICD of 120. Opening year of 2016. So there were no crashes documented at the time we pulled crashes, so everything's looking good at this one. And same thing here at Audubon, Marshview, and Blue Heron. It's a single lane with an ICD of 120 and an opening year of 2016. No crashes to speak of here. Everything looks good. At Davis and Audubon, this is another single lane with an 17. There is one crash that has occurred here, but it was a property damage only crash. At Riggins and Wilcox on 80, an opening year of 2017. There have been 2 crashes here, both property rear end and one being sideswipe passing. So, I know that was a lot of that came to the top, that we decided, we really needed to take a deeper dive into these 3. And coincidentally, they were all on Britton Parkway. So we have Britton and Riggins, Britton and Hayden. This brought us to tasks 2 crashes. And the first 2, I'm going to walk through kind of side by side, and that's being Britton and Riggins, which is here, and Britton and Anson, which is down here, because you'll see these 2 roundabouts are very similar roundabouts, had very similar issues, and also kind of we got to the same conclusion on each. So trying not to repeat myself a lot, we're going to go through them in the year of 2006. So this is one of the original roundabouts in the city. Oh, and you can see the picture and the year. So some improvements were needed regardless of what we were looking at in these studies. And then at Britton and Anson, this was a multi-lane 2x1 hybrid. We call it a hybrid just because if you look leg, it's a single B and an opening year of 2009. And same thing here, a lot of faded pan, 60% planning for actually came to fruition. So the roundabouts were constructed thinking that there was going to be a lot more traffic than actually came. So just keep that in mind throughout the data and everything that we're walking through. And then basically the same thing can be said at Britton and Anson, which is our roundabout over here. We were looking at those crashes spread out throughout the day. We have a little peak here during the AM peak. And then, a lot of property damage only crashes. And then switching over to Britton and Anson, looking at the crash data there. This one was a little bit different. It seemed like we had more crashes in 2016 and 2018. This one did have a lot more fixed object crashes, which was interesting. And looking into the OH1 reports, we could see same thing again at the other one. You read the same report of somebody striking the same exact light pole, or the north splitter island, angle crashes. Those ones seem to be spread out between the east and west approaches. Looking at the crashes over the times of the day, not a lot of trends popping up there. This one did have a lot more injury crashes, which we also thought was interesting, but we really think that's due to the fact that we had a lot more fixed object crashes. So that's really what we're looking at there with those injury crashes. Okay, so then we collected count data at both of these roundabouts. And we collected the data in 2019, and then MORPC provided us growth rates to project those volumes up to 2029. And just some things to note with the volumes here, this is the AM peak on the left and the PM peak on the right. And you can see we have a lot of traffic north-south on Britton Parkway. And then, generally more traffic on the west leg compared to the east leg. But generally, Riggins Road is more low volume compared to Britton Parkway. And, again, taking a look back at Riggins Road, when this was constructed, we were planning for a lot more development. It was constructed as a 5-lane section. And here's our roundabout over here. And looking at the volumes we have inside, this probably didn't need to be a 5-lane section. And then ours is low volume compared to Britton. Okay, then we did capacity analysis for each roundabout. So this was just of our existing roundabout. And I will say, these are just printouts from Sidra. And as you know, like this isn't exactly what it looks like. It's more of just a conceptual idea. So don't take those pavement markings literally. But we conducted our analysis using both Sidra and HCS just so we could compare the results and make sure we were making the most informed decision here. And we used 2019 and 2029 volumes. But you look at these results for the existing roundabout, and you know the normal person would say A+ is all around. This is a great looking roundabout. Let's move on. But you know we really need to take a step back and think, you know, are we providing more capacity than is needed? Is this roundabout larger than it has to be? Is this the reason why we're seeing more crashes here? So we went through a bit of an iterative process here. So I'll walk you through kind of diving into our brains, how we went through this. So the first alternative we looked at was, what is the absolute minimum number of lanes that we can make this roundabout that we can still have acceptable capacity? So can we make this a single lane circulating roundabout and everything still function okay? And we would do that by basically converting the rightmost lane on each approach into a right turn lane only. And as you can see from the results, capacity would still be fine even through 2029. But you know, if you take a step back, look back at lane continuity along Britton. Britton is a 5-lane section, and it really needs to remain a 5-lane section throughout that corridor. So you know, we can't really have some drop turn lanes and creating that hourglass effect along Britton. We need to look at the big picture of Britton as a corridor. So that brought us to alternative 2 of, okay, let's just convert the Riggins approaches. Obviously capacity is still the same methodology with Britton and Anson. So existing conditions, A+ all around, everything looks great, but you know, is this roundabout larger than it needs to be? Are we providing more capacity than it needs? Alternative 1, can we make this a single lane circulating roundabout? Let's convert the rightmost and lane be a right turn lane only and keep a single lane approach, so that one's fine. Okay, so overall, this brought us to some short-term, low-cost restriping plans for both of the roundabouts. So by restriping plans, I literally mean all we're doing is changing out the pavement markings. We're not moving any curb lines whatsoever. And this is basically implementing alternative 2 that we talked. So zooming in here on the east-west approaches, 1, lines being more tangent. Look at the Hilliard GES task number. Going through this, this was a bit of a different animal compared to the last 2 roundabouts we talked about. So this was a multi-lane 2x1 with an ICD of 160, 180. And an opening year of 2006. So again, one of the city's original roundabouts. And looking back at the history here, you know, this was a sub-area plan from back in 2004. So the 2004 rezoning showed a planned relocation of Hayden Run Road. So it basically dips Hayden Run Road down south, and then we have this planned development around here. And then this is actually the location of our existing roundabout that we're talking about that was constructed in 2000, commercial driveway intersection. But if you know anything about Hilliard, if you drive through, 45 miles per hour. So vehicles coming in hot into the crash data a little bit more. You can see how have a week of crashes here during the AM peak, you know, some during lunch. It kind of taper off through the evening. Some property, mostly property damage only crashes, but some injury to speak of. And then we were scoped to do a crash diagram for this one. We knew it was going to be a little bit more involved, so we wanted to have that visual. So you can see here the different cluster of, first I'll walk you through the angle crash clusters here, here, and here. And, you know, we really expect those concentration of crashes to be due to drivers not being familiar with the correct way to enter or exit a roundabout. So kind of what Letty was talking about before. We also expect it's because drivers were accepting a smaller gap than what was needed due to the frustration of sitting in those long queues that we mentioned. So, you know, we've all been there. You're waiting in the long line of traffic, and then you finally get to the roundabout and you think, okay, I'm not going to wait here long. I'm just going to go when I find a gap, even though it's may not be long enough. Then other things to note here, you see a lot of rear end crashes over here on the westbound approach. We expect that those are due to, you know, vehicles not expecting there to be a queue there. Also probably from that driver frustration as well. You know, you're waiting and you see a gap, you think the vehicle in front of you is going to go, but they don't. And so then you end up rear-ending them. You can also see some fixed object crashes here at the splitter islands. Okay, then we did our capacity analysis. And like I said, this was a bit of a different animal. We did see some Fs in our existing conditions here, which, you know, matched what we were seeing in the field. You have, during the AM peak, you have an F on the eastbound approach, and during the PM peak, you have an F on the westbound approach. And then same thing, I will walk you through a bit of an iterative process here that we went through. You know, really just testing out what are the different lane combinations we can look at here, seeing what we can do for improvements in the future. So our first alternative was really just to determine the number of lanes necessary to address these capacity issues that we're seeing in the existing conditions. So that involved adding a right turn lane on the east end, but we're really okay with that for now. Alternative 2, this one was investigating the possibility of converting this roundabout into a single lane circulating roundabout. So, you know, we knew that this probably wouldn't work, but we just said, hey, you know, this worked for the other ones, let's see. So we converted that right, and as you can see, this one investigated, fixes things during the AM peak. So this one, same thing. Alternative 4, we looked at, so let's take Britton north-south, convert that rightmost lane to be a right turn lane only, and then add those right turn lanes on the east-west approaches. So this fixed our capacity issues that we were having on the east-west approaches, but this issue surfaced on the southbound approach. So again, not something that we could recommend. So overall, this brought us to pavement marking upgrade that we could do right now. And the other one being more of a long-term improvement that the city can plan for in the future. So this was just the pavement marking improvements. Again, not moving any curb lines, adding the strong skip lines, a little bit more to east-west approach of east-west corridor. All right.
Object, a lot of these are capacity at some of these. And the other thing that kind of compounded, so if you have a speed related crash and you hit a light pole and it keeps getting hit, and it doesn't get, after a while, I think our operations guys are like, we have to keep putting this light pole back up, which then led to some of the dark conditions, which could have been contributory to some of the other problems and the fading pavement marking. So it all sort of starts to snowball a little bit. But one thing that I think that came out of this, that we've learned, that we've changed some of our standards, is really looking at those light pole placements. You know, we used to put our light poles 2 foot behind the back of curb, and now at our roundabouts, we're definitely putting them 4 to 6 foot back. Would highly recommend that, because honestly, even when you're having like even a small fender bender type of a crash, if somebody happens to hit one of the light poles, it's probably going to fall down. So I think just getting them back a little bit further is a good thing to do. And then also, when you start thinking about these speed-related crashes, you look at most of those Britton Parkway roundabouts, even the ones where we're not having a high number of crashes because they're maybe 2x1s. The 180 ICD is kind of where we used to start at for the 2-lane configurations. And so, you know, that's something that really rethinking that shouldn't be our starting place anymore, but it was back then. And then lastly, on the analysis that Gina did, that she kind of talked us through, is when the capacity analysis, going through that iterative process of taking away lanes and looking at what you get. I would encourage folks to go through that process on a new roundabout, is take away lanes and see what you get, because you might be surprised going into it thinking, oh, I'm going to have a 2x1. Well, maybe you can make it work as a single laner with right turn bypass lanes only. And then I just think you add in a little bit more safety with that. And another thing that she did, using both SIDRA and HCS, I know that's a little bit more time, but if you have that ability to take that time and look at both of those tools, it's just more information for each one of us as we're trying to make good decisions. All right, so I know we have a few questions that have come in, and I think I'm going to hold them to the end because I don't have a ton more to go over here. But I want to kind of talk through crash trends at all of our roundabouts. So like I said, we kind of had focused at our top 3, but I kind of wanted to do an overall comparison. I'm really fortunate that because of all the problems that we had at our top 3 high crash roundabouts, is I was able to get a change in policy in the way that we handle crash reporting internally here with our police department. It used to be that I would have to wait until a crash report would show up like on ODOT's GCAT system. So, you know, a long time later before they were actually viewable, and I would not get weekly crash reports. Well, because of some changes that our police department made with their reporting, I actually get weekly crash reports. So every week I flag any roundabout crash, and I also flag any injury, not just at a roundabout, but anywhere there's an injury. So I feel like I'm doing a better job of keeping track of what's going on in our community. So here's the good and the bad. So you can see these roundabouts are listed in order that they were installed. So here are the years. So going from 2006 through 2018. And you can see our little single laners here. Boy, they are performing extremely well. And even some of our 2x1s are really performing quite well. These are some of the ones that Gina talked about that we did a little bit more of a deeper dive. So when you start looking at number of crashes, number of lanes, also clearly the volumes that you have at these intersections and the distribution of the volumes are really going to play into your crash rates as well. And one of the questions that came in talked about that, so I will answer that question shortly. But so here are the 4 roundabouts that we have future modifications, and actually 2 of them were just done last week, so those are actually completed. That's that restriping. Now, I would never use striping to guide drivers from the get-go. Like, I'm a huge fan now of using physical curbs, keeping your circulatory roadways as narrow as possible, and making up that difference with a truck apron, because we all know that striping doesn't really fix all the problems, but it does, help to provide a little bit more guidance to drivers. And when we're looking at, we're trying to do low-cost solutions, I think striping can be a good low-cost solution. So next year at our main and Scioto Darby Road roundabout, that was our #2 intersection. I talked you through the changes we made last year, and I talked about how a lot of them were temporary because we wanted to see how it was going to work. So actually we were going to make them permanent next year, and we were fortunate enough to receive some funding through the Highway Safety Improvement Program, the safety funds that are administered through Michelle May at ODOT Central Office and her team. So with that, we're going to be doing basically making the temporary geometric changes permanent with curb. We're going to be doing resurfacing, actually putting in the raised crosswalks at the crosswalks, overhead lane control signs instead of the side mounted, and also going to be modifying the pavement markings the same way we did at our main cemetery, which is our #1 intersection. And then lastly, Gina talked about this one already. In the future, we are looking at going back and adding in some of the right turn bypass lanes with the banana islands, modifying the splitter islands. And one other thing is that being one of our first roundabouts that we put in, if you remember in the early days, used to be that it was not recommended to use a truck apron for a multi-lane roundabout because the idea was that the trucks will take both lanes. I think that has definitely changed. I am a huge fan of truck aprons, so if we're going to be making modifications out here, my goal would be to also put in the truck aprons there as well. So that's hopefully going to be something we'll maybe design next year and build 2 years out. So here's the nuts and bolts of it here, lessons learned and how we're going to be doing the things that we're going to change to modify our best practices. And so for others out there that work for other government agencies or whether you work for consultants, these are things to keep in mind. So hopefully, maybe you guys can learn from some of our mistakes and have much more success. I mean, I think overall we've shown a lot of success with our program, but I'm always looking to try to share the things that we've learned to help others. So #1, you do not want to supersize roundabout, folks. So you want to stick with the fun size. Okay, so no big Slurpees. Let's try to keep our ICDs as small as possible within reason. I know Mark McCullough talked a lot about earlier in the week or late last week about mini roundabouts. We do not have any mini roundabouts in the city of Hilliard. I'm very intrigued, but I think that for us, we don't have very many or any always stop intersections. So I'm not quite ready to dip my toes into minis, but compact urbans and smaller ICD 2x1s definitely are in our future. And so different from size is number of lanes. Remember, folks, less is more. Anytime you can do single circulating lanes with right turn bypass lanes or just do a single laner, I think that's the great way to go. And, this was a big one. We really need to challenge the assumptions that we have used for years that are really ingrained in all of us traffic people. We've always done it this way, looking at 20-year traffic volumes. But the reality is we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And when we were designing traffic signals or traditional intersections, maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. We were being fiscally prudent by planning for the future and having enough lanes to accommodate that growth. But what we've learned here with roundabouts is that is a huge mistake. We really need to look at, if you want to do those 20-year projections, but then maybe back it off to an interim year and figure out, maybe you design initially for the ultimate and you buy right of way for the ultimate, but you build the smaller, compact, fewer lane roundabout. And who knows, maybe you don't even need to make that improvement in the future. And I just think it's rethinking about what we consider acceptable. And the thing that I keep thinking about is we really need to start prioritizing safety over capacity. Unfortunately, and I was guilty of it, we really looked at level of service was the driving factor for most of our intersection improvements. And we've seen over the years, as especially in like suburban central Ohio, there's been a lot of growth. But there's negative consequences to that. And usually it has to do with severity of crashes and people getting injured. So I think we need to be a little bit more willing to live with maybe some peak hour congestion for an overall benefit to the system. So you look at the image on the left, that's a straight 2x2. Like, let's say you were planning this and you saw a level of service C in 2040 for a 2x2. And then if you analyze it as a 2x1 or a hybrid, and you were looking at a level of service E, or maybe, heaven forbid, almost an F in that PM peak hour, which would you pick? 10, 15 years ago, I would have probably picked the one on the left, level service C. That's what we want. But now, absolutely not. I would not pick that, because I think you're setting yourself up to not have the kind of success that we all want to have. Fishhook markings, I've made this pretty clear. I think when we've talked to a lot of drivers in our study, and I got some comments like, what are those squiggly lines? You got to think there's so much to process at a multi-lane roundabout when you're coming into them. And you want drivers to be able to quickly look at something and process it really quickly. And when you have something different, it's harder for them to understand it. A traditional arrow is something they're very familiar with. Overhead lane control signs. So I'm not saying you should do these at all roundabouts by any means, but clearly the overhead lane control signs are so much easier to see, and it helps people to get positioned in the correct lanes sooner. And so I would say, if you really do need a 2x2, you probably really need to include the overhead lane control signs. At least that's what I would do. So raised crosswalks. So where we put them in on our Main Street corridor is a pretty high pedestrian corridor. It's a block or two from our historic district. It's also within a school zone where like 1,600 students attend in grades K all the way through 12. There's 4 different schools. So we had a pretty high pedestrian environment. So I do think they are a really good tool in the right location. They do help to address some of the ADA accessibility issues. But some really important key things is collect your data. Get your speed data so you know where you are beforehand. And this is an important one. You really need to make sure that you have political support and thick skin, because guaranteed, if you build them so that they're effective, you are going to get some flack from drivers about it, because let's face it, people want to be able to drive as fast as they want, and they don't want to slow down. And you're putting something in the road that slows them down. But honestly, if you're going to do it, it's going to cost some money. So you better go big or go home, because if you put something, I'll call it wimpy, in there, and we did do that at other location, they really aren't that effective. And you kind of, in my opinion, have kind of thrown your money out. So in those design details and construction methods really do matter on these raised crosswalks. They're challenging. And actually, if any of you are going to be at OTEC later in the month, I am doing a session where I'm kind of digging in a little bit more on the details of those raised crosswalks. So I'm happy to, if anybody can't attend OTEC, I'm happy to share that information on my presentation once it's complete. A couple other things. So I'm not a designer. I don't design roundabouts, but I know things that have kind of changed over the years. And if you think about it, in the late 2000s, we seemed to having a lot of problems with path overlap. Some of them related more to the radial type design. And so as we were starting to build more 2x2s, or at least 2-lane entries, this problem started popping up. And so the solution that came to this problem was, okay, we need to increase deflection and also increase tangents on your entries. So, but I think through this, we've kind of created this feeling of merge on the entry, which goes back to the human factors. And do drivers really understand that they yield, or are they just thinking they can merge right into that outside lane? So these are questions that I pose. Is the entry radius too big? Is the tangent right here, is it too long? I think sometimes it is. Is the offset maybe too great? Is the distance to cross too long? And this is kind of important. I mean, look at this. If you really need a 3-lane circulating roundabout, what's the likelihood that during a peak hour that someone's actually going to be able to find gaps in all of those 3 lanes at the same time to get across? Because it's really a long distance to cross. And so really, did we go too far to fix path overlap? Maybe. So I'm kind of a Goldilocks person. You need to figure out that happy medium. A lot of us are also rethinking circle. We tend to start with a circle, but I think, I know Hillary Eisenbrand's in her training things talk a lot about, it doesn't have to be a circle. There are dog bones and peanuts and ovals, and coming soon to Hilliard, Ohio in 2021, I'm going to name it the avocado about, because it really looks like an avocado. And so I'm thinking I might bring my margaritas and chips and salsa out here when it opens up, just to kind of celebrate. So obviously, those of you that know me know that education and outreach is something I'm very passionate about. I think it's really important that we can't assume that drivers know how to drive a roundabout, especially a 2x2. And one thing that we realize is that we really need to keep it simple, keep it short, sweet, and simple, stupid. In the age of social media, if you have a 3-minute long video, I can almost guarantee that people are not going to watch it. It might be a great video, but unless you've made it really like funny and entertaining, most people are going to check out. So we chose to take the method of, we're going to focus on 3 things, because yeah, we know people need to slow down. Yeah, we know you need to look to the left, but that's not what people were screwing up on. People were screwing up on getting into the incorrect lane and not yielding to both lanes. So those were our key focuses. And then obviously, anytime we're talking about roundabouts, we want folks to yield to pedestrians. So I'm often asked, given all the pain and heartache that we've gone through over the last almost decade, would I do it again? At this particular location with all these schools and so close to our urban core, downtown Hilliard district, I think I would do it again. I would do it differently, but I would still do this 2x2. Because the option was like a 6-lane section, and that's certainly not what we want in the heart of our town. So we've got something that, while not perfect, I think it manages a lot of traffic pretty doggone well, slows people down, it looks nice. And yeah, so I think I would do it here. That being said, in case you hadn't noticed, I have not done any more 2x2s since this one, and I probably will not. Sadly, I would probably, just for me, choose a signal over a 2x2 unless the work on the pooled fund study that Dr. Zhang was talking about really shows us some successes. And boy, here's a good location to give it a try. And then maybe I would do it again. So that is the end of my presentation. And I have seen, how much time do we have here? Looks like we've got about a little less than 15 minutes. I will read a couple of these questions and try to answer them. And if I can't get through them, I would be happy to follow up directly with anybody as well. And you're also welcome to email me or Gina at any time. So let's see here. First question, any thoughts on using traffic calming, humps, different aggregate type, etc., prior to reaching the crosswalks? Do you think this would cause drivers to adhere to the speed limits and give peds a more subjective view of their safety? So I actually thought about this, because especially in like a retrofit, getting those raised crosswalks in a way that meets ADA, so it's the maximum of a 5% slope within the travel way as a pedestrian is crossing across the crosswalk, is really tough to do. It would be much easier to just build a speed hump. But I guess I'm not sure. I was hesitant to try something like that because that's really not the guidance. And also I didn't want to get the speed humps too far out in front of the roundabout. So I didn't want somebody to hit them going 35 miles per hour. I wanted them to hit them going closer to 20. So I think keeping them closer to the circulating roadway is pretty critical in terms of safety, because the last thing I want to do is have somebody hit them and go flying. So I think as much as it's tough doing them as raised crosswalks, I think it's probably the best. So second question is, I'm hearing a lot about property damage crashes. Can you elaborate on what that is? Please give different examples. So property damage crashes are like fender benders. So, somebody, driving at a slow rate of speed into someone's bumper and usually doesn't require you to be towed off or anything like that. It's sort of like swapping paint and scraping things up. So, but I don't want to discount those because, if you've ever been involved in a fender bender, it's a big pain in the rear end. So, yeah, even though nobody's getting hurt, when you have a lot of PDOs, it's not good either. So next question is, on the roundabout crash history, do you have a comparison to crashes at the intersections before the roundabout? This comes from Dr. Russell, one of my mentors. So unfortunately, no, I do not. You know, it's one of those things that in hindsight, going back, don't always do that. I suppose some of our newer roundabouts would be pretty easy to do because our state system for crashes, it goes back far enough that I could do that. You know, bottom line, most of the places where we have put roundabouts have either been with new development, so there was no intersection there before, or it was an intersection where we really need to make some sort of a capacity improvement. So it was pretty congested before. So most of the crashes in the before condition were PDOs. We actually only have, I think, one location where we have installed a roundabout that was a T intersection where some people had gotten clobbered in the before condition. So elsewhere, they've always been in locations where we did not have a high number or a high severity of crashes before. Let's see here. What are the ADTs and peak hour volumes of the different roundabouts? Is there a correlation between higher crash frequency and higher volumes? Absolutely, I think there is. I also think, you know, if you have a busier intersection on the main line and on the side street, it's not so much. I think while it's harder for those side street folks to get in, you're probably not going to have as high of crashes. I can tell you our 1, 2, and 3 roundabouts. So number 1 has about 35-ish thousand vehicles per day, 3,300-ish in the PM peak. Our number 2 and number 3 have slightly less. They're more in the 30,000 range, maybe 29 to 31,000 ADT. So they're, you know, they're handling a fair amount of traffic. So I guess if I went through the process of looking at rates, it might equalize things a little bit. But I do think that might play into some of the findings of the pooled funds study. Like, are there, and also like the location of driveways on the exits, that could be playing into it as well. Let's see. Do you have any insight that the 2x2 roundabouts might have been over-designed? Would congestion really have been unacceptable if they were single lane roundabouts? So at number 1, it was not over-designed in terms of number of lanes. I also don't think that it is oversized in terms of ICD because we were trying to retrofit in a really build-up corridor. So we actually were worried during the initial design stages that, gosh, it was awfully small. Again, think about this was 2006-ish, 7-ish when we were starting that design. I think the ICD of that 2x2 is about maybe like 170-ish. I'd have to look. Now, the other ones, in hindsight, I think maybe we could have gotten away with some bypass lane, so right turn bypass lane, not a full 2x2, and gotten along reasonably well. Let's see, new question. With the crash data that they are showing us, did they see any drops in the traffic volumes? As in, was there any noticeable apathy by drivers to use the routes with a roundabout in preference for alternate routes with no roundabouts? That's a good question. I'm not sure I have an answer to that. You know, you do say some people, oh, I'm just not going to go that way anymore. But, you know, honestly, we've built a lot of roundabouts, and if you're not going to drive through them, you're going to have to go pretty far out of your way. So I think most people are going to take the shortest route, regardless of whether there's a roundabout there or not.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, Letty, that you hear that in some places where it's, you know, the one roundabout that they put in a city and everybody's going to avoid it. But in Hilliard, there are so many roundabouts. Hilliard residents are used to driving through roundabouts. You can't really avoid them anymore.
Yeah. Dr. Russell asked, how is the public accepting new roundabouts now? Any pushback for no more roundabouts? No, thankfully, we've shown some successes with our single laners. So whenever we're trying to pitch a new roundabout, I always say, this is a single lane roundabout like this intersection. Actually, when we've presented alternatives during the, you know, the preliminary stage of project development, we have public meetings. We usually present 2 different alternatives, one being a signal and one being a roundabout, unless the roundabout is hands down a winner. And usually it's not a slam dunk in terms of acceptance, but the majority of the people typically do prefer the roundabouts. As long as they're always like, though, you're not going to build it like that one at Meanan Cemetery, are you? And I'm like, no, we won't do that. Over the years, have you done any public education on how to draw the roundabouts? Yes, absolutely. Last year we did a ton. We put some videos together. I donned my cape and became Professor Roundabout and went to functions and passed out all kinds of educational information about how to drive roundabouts. We also got our police involved. We got our fire department involved. We went to the schools. We went to the senior centers. We've been all over the place with the show. Let's see here. It seems like signing and pavement markings can have a major impact on the success of a roundabout. Signs don't really fade, however, markings do. Is there any data on recessed pavement markings lasting longer, having a positive effect? Boy, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for that. We mostly use thermo. I've actually never had experience doing the recessed pavement markings. As I understand, it's definitely, excuse me, more labor initially. I do think like in colder climates, it might be a really cool thing to give it a try, because if you're not getting, lots of times if you have a lot of snow plows, that you might pick off the edges of the thermo. I guess I can't answer that question because I don't know, but I would be interested in learning more about that. I guess the downfall of that is, so marking crews, I've learned over the years that I need to go out there with the marking crew that's pre-marking to make sure they don't screw anything up. And so if you have, I don't know how the recess marking is, do they grind something in? It's not as forgiving. So if you screw up on something like that, you're kind of stuck with it. So I think that's all the questions. Gina, do you know, did I miss any?
Yeah,
Did you have any?
I think I can see some questions that you can't for some reason.
Okay.
So, and some of these I think are directed to you as well. So I'll just ask them and then you can answer, or I'll answer. So first, for Riggins, did you consider making the northbound left turn only and keeping the southbound as existing?
At Riggins, I don't think we did. We did not have strong enough turning volumes to probably justify that. And I also think, like, Gina, you talked a little bit about this, that continuity of lanes on Britton. It was our philosophy of the time. This was probably pre-crash, pre-2008 crash, is, we're going to go in once and we're going to build these roadways and it's going to serve this corridor and it's going to be a commercial corridor and we're going to have office buildings and, all this stuff going on. And then 2008 happened and we still aren't back to that. And now with COVID, I think a lot of the big office developments that tend to have those really heavy peaks may be a thing of the past.
Okay, next question. Any consideration for relocating streetlight poles that keep getting hit? I know you've mentioned that before.
Yes. With any modification, yes. As a general maintenance, I guess I got to figure out, is it something that is happening because it's truly in the way, like with the turn? Like, we know we have one location where trucks, it's our single lane entry at Anson, where trucks are just tracking up over the curb and like pushing the light pole down. That one probably yes. The others that are speed related, they're just so random. And it is, it's a fair amount of work to dig up the lighting conduit and move the poles back, new foundations. And I guess it's one of those budget items that just hasn't really gotten programmed. So yeah, we probably should, but I guess I put it off for a while.
Okay, what ICD do you recommend for 2x1 and 2x2s? If you had to do it all over again, what ICD would you have gone with?
Okay, so good question. We put in our last 2x1 in the 2-lane section. Boy, I should have had it up in front of me. I think it is a 140. maybe a 145 on the 2-lane section. Boy, you know what? Actually, if there's another question, Gina, I can look it up and
Okay,
I
there's
might be able to.
ever any thought to using a turbo roundabout anywhere or some turbo concepts?
Yes, I am very intrigued by the turbos. It makes me a little nervous because, you know, we were all raised that you're supposed to have deflection on entry, so it's kind of hard to change that. And I'm also not sure I want to jump out on the front on that thing, on that topic, but I'm really curious to see how things go in Florida. They've got a turbo going in. So I'm sitting back and watching. I'm not sure if you truly need a 2x2, if the turbo is the way to go because they end up being really big. But for a 2x1, I would consider it. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm definitely intrigued. And the person that asked me about the ICDs, email me and I can give you plans and give you exact dimensions of our recent 2x1s. And I think they're the sweet spot for me.
Okay, that's all the questions I have over here, unless you got any more.
Nope, I think we're good and we're actually out of time.
Yep.
So good timing, everyone. So I don't know if Paula is going to get back on here,
I am
but
here.
I just want to, great. So thanks everybody for listening in. Thank you, Paula, for hosting.
Thank you so much. We are recording this and we will do our best to get this out to everyone. And Letty and Gina, I'll send you any follow-up questions so that you can make sure that those get answered.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.